The painting that divided a city. The museum's grand atrium buzzed with anticipation. Rows of minimalist spotlights illuminated walls adorned with carefully curated pieces from artists around the globe. Tonight marked the unveiling of Echoes of the Past, Art of Social Change, a major exhibition celebrating works inspired by pivotal moments in history. Guests mingled, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries, their voices blending into a low hum of excitement and curiosity. At the center of the room hung the piece everyone would later talk about, a painting so potent in its imagery that it drew audiences in like a magnet. The work, an oil on canvas, measured nearly 6 feet wide and depicted a chaotic scene. A group of uniformed police officers and white demonstrators cornering a young black man in the street. His expression was frozen in terror, his body mid-fall, as he shielded himself from a baton raised high above him. In the background, a crowd of onlookers either turned away or stood frozen in silent complicity. The title of the piece, etched in a brass plaque below, read, "No Sanctuary." The artist was listed simply as Unknown 1963. The first wave of guests approached the painting with a mix of intrigue and hesitation. "It's raw, isn't it?" murmured a woman in a black cocktail dress to her companion. "Raw, sure, but isn't it a bit exaggerated?" the man beside her replied. He tilted his head, scrutinizing the scene. "I mean, were things ever really that bad? This feels theatrical, almost manipulative." Nearby, a younger man in a hoodie crossed his arms and frowned. "Bad? That's an understatement. This is history. It's not supposed to be comfortable." The murmurs spread like wildfire. Words like provocative, disturbing, and unnecessary floated through the air. An elderly gentleman in a crisp navy suit remarked, "I don't understand why we're still bringing up this kind of thing. Haven't we moved past it?" His companion nodded in agreement, their expressions neutral but firm. The museum's head curator, Alice Warren, stepped onto a small stage at the side of the room, microphone in hand. Her sleek, modern attire reflected the minimalist aesthetic of the museum, but the strain in her smile betrayed her nerves. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth but carefully measured, "welcome to Echoes of the Past. Tonight we honor the power of art to capture moments that shape our collective memory. Among these works is a particularly poignant piece, No Sanctuary, which highlights the struggles of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Alice paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. While the artist remains unknown, the emotions evoked by this work are timeless. It invites us to reflect on how far we've come, and perhaps how far we still have to go. As the applause began, Alice stepped back, silently praying the audience would focus on the artistic elements rather than the volatile subject matter. But the room's atmosphere remained heavy, the undercurrent of tension palpable. As the evening progressed, the painting became a lightning rod for debate. "It's not just art, it's a statement," argued Danielle, a local community organizer, who stood in front of the piece with her arms crossed. Her voice was calm but firm. "This isn't exaggeration. This is reality for so many people, even today." "Reality? Come on," countered James, a businessman in his 40s. "We're talking about something that happened 60 years ago. Why keep dredging this up?" Danielle's eyes flashed with anger. "Because it's still happening. Police brutality, systemic racism, it hasn't gone anywhere. Pretending otherwise doesn't make it disappear." James opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, an older black man stepped forward. His deep, gravelly voice silenced the crowd. "I was there," he said simply. The man introduced himself as Walter Green, a retired teacher who had lived through the height of the civil rights movement. He pointed a trembling hand at the painting. This is no exaggeration. I was a teenager in Birmingham in '63. I saw scenes just like this one. Hell, I knew people who didn't make it out alive." The room fell silent as Walter recounted his memories. The marches, the violence, the fear that gripped his community. "They tried to silence us just like they're trying to silence this painting now. But art has a way of keeping the truth alive, even when people don't want to hear it." Some in the crowd nodded solemnly, while others shifted uncomfortably. A woman near the back muttered, "It's just one perspective. You can't hold an entire group accountable for what a few did." Walter's gaze hardened. "One perspective? This was the reality for millions of us. Ignoring it doesn't change that. As the night wore on, questions began to circulate. Who was the artist? How did this painting, so vivid and personal, come to be? Rumors spread that the artist might have been directly involved in the protests, perhaps even a victim of the violence depicted. A journalist in the crowd, sensing a story, approached Alice Warren. "Do you know where the painting came from?" she asked. Alice hesitated. "It was donated anonymously decades ago. We've tried to trace its origins, but records are incomplete." The journalist raised an eyebrow. Incomplete or buried? By the end of the evening, No Sanctuary had left an indelible mark on everyone who saw it. Some left the museum inspired, others outraged. Social media exploded with photos and heated debates, the hashtag number No Sanctuary trending within hours. Yet the painting's origins remained shrouded in mystery. Who was the unknown artist? What happened to them after creating such a powerful piece? And why had their work been hidden for so long? As the museum doors closed for the night, Alice Warren stood alone before the painting. Her reflection shimmered in the protective glass, a faint silhouette against the haunting image. In her heart, she knew this was just the beginning. The painting had done its job. It had forced people to confront the past. Now it was up to them to decide what to do with it. Walter Green's voice carried through the room, compelling everyone to turn their attention back to the painting. "I remember the screams," he began, his eyes locked on the young man in the artwork, frozen in terror. The way the air felt, it was heavy, electric. You never knew when the police baton would find you next, or when the dogs would be released. He took a deep breath, his voice cracking with emotion. "That boy in the painting? He could have been me. Hell, he could have been any of us." A hush fell over the crowd. Walter's words had cast a shadow over the earlier chatter, silencing those who had so easily dismissed the painting's significance. Not everyone, however, was convinced. A younger man dressed sharply in a tailored suit stepped forward. "I don't mean to be disrespectful, sir," he began, his tone careful but firm. "But isn't it possible that this painting exaggerates what happened? I've read history books too, and things weren't as black and white as this makes it seem." Walter's lips tightened. Before he could respond, Danielle interjected, her voice cutting through the air. "What books were you reading? The ones that try to sanitize history so no one has to feel uncomfortable?" The man flushed but didn't back down. "It's not about comfort, it's about accuracy. And frankly, it seems to me that this painting is designed to provoke guilt. We should be focusing on unity, not dredging up division." Walter turned to him, his eyes blazing with quiet intensity. "Unity? Unity doesn't come from pretending the wounds aren't there. It comes from acknowledging them and doing the hard work of healing. This painting doesn't provoke guilt, it provokes truth." The tension in the room was palpable. Some nodded in agreement with Walter. Others looked away, uncomfortable. The debate raged on, each side growing louder as they fought to assert their perspective. And all the while, the painting hung silently, its raw imagery speaking louder than any of them could. Within days, photos of No Sanctuary flooded social media. People across the spectrum of political beliefs weighed in with fiery opinions. "This is history we can't ignore. Bravo to the museum for shedding light on our past," one commenter wrote, their words accompanied by a clenched fist emoji. But not all reactions were positive. "This is just another example of woke culture trying to make white people feel guilty for things they didn't do," one user fired back, gaining hundreds of likes. In no time, the painting became a flashpoint for cultural debates. Influencers, activists, and pundits took to platforms like Twitter and Instagram to voice their opinions. The hashtag number No Sanctuary began trending alongside art or agenda and cancel culture. One particularly incendiary video came from a local businessman named Tom Harris, who had attended the opening night. In the video, Tom stood in his office, the museum's program for echoes of the past in hand. "This painting," he said, shaking the program at the camera, "is not art, it's a weapon. A weapon designed to make people like me, people who had nothing to do with those events, feel like villains. It's divisive, it's inflammatory, and frankly, it has no place in a museum that claims to represent all of us." Tom's video quickly went viral, racking up millions of views and sparking intense debates. Some hailed him as a voice of reason, while others accused him of trying to silence the truth. Under mounting pressure, Alice Warren released a public statement. Art has always been a reflection of society, its beauty, its pain, its triumphs, and its failures. No Sanctuary is no different. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths and ask difficult questions. We stand by its inclusion in our exhibition. The statement did little to quell the controversy. Protesters began gathering outside the museum, some holding signs that read, "Art not agitation," and "Stop dividing us." Meanwhile, counter-protesters held signs that read, "Truth matters," and "No justice, no peace." Amid the chaos, a new mystery emerged. An anonymous email sent to the museum claimed to know the identity of the artist behind No Sanctuary. The email's cryptic message read, "The truth is closer than you think. Look deeper into the archives." Alice and her team dove into the museum's records, uncovering a decades-old acquisition ledger. To their shock, the painting had been donated by a former museum employee who had abruptly left their position in the early 1970s. Further investigation revealed the donor was a Black woman named Eleanor Shaw, a name that meant little to the current staff, but might hold the key to the painting's origins. Climax: uncovering the truth. The controversy surrounding No Sanctuary continued to intensify after its unveiling. Alice Warren, the museum's curator, sought to uncover the artist's identity after receiving a mysterious email. This led her and historian Thomas Sykes to uncover a shocking truth. The painting's creator, Samuel Carter, was a Black artist and civil rights activist. Their investigation revealed that Samuel had been involved in protests and had witnessed police brutality firsthand. No Sanctuary depicted a real event from 1963 in which a Black teenager, Leon Jackson, was attacked by white demonstrators and police. This incident had been officially buried, but Samuel had immortalized it in his art. His work, too controversial for its time, had been hidden away by a former museum employee, Eleanor Shaw. As the story behind the painting unfolded, it reignited debates about police brutality and systemic racism. Activists, especially from the Black Lives Matter movement, saw the painting as a call to action. But with this revelation, protests outside the museum turned violent, mirroring the struggles depicted in the artwork. The peaceful demonstrators faced aggression from counter-protesters, showing that the battle for justice was far from over. Finally, documents from the police archives confirmed what had been feared. The violence depicted in No Sanctuary was part of a broader, systematic effort to suppress civil rights protests. The museum's findings sent shockwaves through the community. Alice realized that the painting, No Sanctuary, had done more than capture history. It had forced society to confront uncomfortable truths, continuing its journey as a powerful symbol of resistance. The growing conflict. The unveiling of No Sanctuary had ignited a firestorm. The painting's raw depiction of racial violence during the civil rights movement quickly became the center of a bitter public debate. On one side were those who demanded its removal, accusing the artwork of being anti-white and unnecessarily divisive. They claimed that the painting was a distortion of history, one that unfairly painted an entire group of people as oppressors. For them, its presence in the museum was a symbol of a culture that wanted to stir the pot and create division. On the other side were the activists, particularly from the Black community, who saw the painting as an essential, painful reminder of the ongoing struggle against racial injustice. For them, No Sanctuary wasn't about causing division. It was about forcing society to confront uncomfortable truths. As the debate raged on, the museum became a battlefield. Black visitors and activists who attended discussions found themselves met with hostility. In public forums and artist talks, some attendees mocked their concerns, accusing them of playing the race card. Others spat on them or hurled racist slurs. The artwork's presence was no longer just a point of discussion. It had become a flashpoint for escalating racial tensions. Behind the scenes, museum staff members began to receive threats. Anonymous phone calls warned them to remove the painting or face consequences. As the weeks went by, the threats grew more violent. Some radical groups began openly discussing vandalizing the painting. One group, calling themselves the Patriots, viewed the artwork as an attack on American values and culture. They vowed to remove it from the gallery by any means necessary. The situation reached a breaking point one evening when the painting was defaced. Someone threw red paint on it, staining the canvas and turning its figures into a chilling symbol of bloodshed. The museum called the police, but the perpetrators remained unidentified. The act of vandalism only heightened the tension, turning the museum into a target for both radical protesters and counter-protesters. For Alice Warren, the museum's curator, the situation was becoming increasingly untenable. She had believed in the power of the painting to spark conversation and reflection. But the threats were escalating. Employees were afraid to come to work, and some were even receiving violent messages. Alice began to question whether keeping the painting on display was worth the risk. As the weeks dragged on, Alice was caught in a moral and professional dilemma. Some board members urged her to remove the painting, citing the increasing threats to the staff and the museum's reputation. The museum was under pressure from every direction. Business owners worried about the negative impact on tourism, while some citizens argued that the museum was catering to an agenda that was dividing the community. The protests outside the museum had become regular occurrences, with both sides shouting slogans and demanding action. On the other hand, Alice knew that removing No Sanctuary would be a symbolic defeat. It would feel like silencing a story that needed to be told, one that was uncomfortable but necessary. The painting wasn't just about the past. It was a mirror to the present, showing how much work was still needed to address racial inequality and injustice. The situation outside the museum began to deteriorate further. The protests became more violent, with demonstrators on both sides clashing. The police presence increased, but it did little to calm the rising tensions. The violence spilled into the streets. Protesters hurled insults at one another, and fights broke out in front of the museum. The painting's existence had become a battleground for ideological warfare. In response, a group of radical protesters tried to break into the museum to destroy the painting. The security team was overwhelmed, and the police struggled to maintain order. Some of the museum staff began to worry for their safety, feeling like they were being caught in the middle of a war they never signed up for. At a city council meeting, the debate about No Sanctuary reached a fever pitch. Lawmakers were deeply divided over whether the painting should remain in the museum. Some argued that removing it would ease tensions, while others insisted that the painting was a necessary challenge to society's reluctance to confront its past. The mayor called for calm, but the rift in the city was growing wider by the day. In the midst of all this, Alice made a decision. No Sanctuary would remain in the museum. She could not erase its message. She believed that the artwork's presence was vital, even if it was uncomfortable. It was forcing the city to reckon with its past and with the present. To remove it now would be a victory for those who wanted to silence uncomfortable truths. But Alice knew that the decision would only escalate the situation. She had no illusions about the consequences. The painting would continue to divide the city. The protests, the threats, and the violence would likely intensify. With her decision made, Alice braced for the fallout. The museum staff rallied around the decision, but the city itself remained in turmoil. The painting had become a symbol of everything that was wrong and everything that needed to change. The struggle for justice had been placed in the spotlight once again, and now the question was whether the city and the country was ready to face the truth. As the museum doors closed for the night, Alice stood in front of No Sanctuary, silently reflecting on the weight of her decision. The painting had forced a reckoning, and whether people accepted it or not, the truth it represented could not be erased. Now it was up to the city and the world to decide whether they would face it. The controversy surrounding No Sanctuary had reached its peak, and the museum remained a battleground for competing ideologies. But in the midst of the turmoil, the persistence of a small group of journalists and activists finally uncovered the truth about the painting's origins. Through months of research, they pieced together the story of the artist, a previously unknown black painter named Samuel Hayes. It was revealed that Samuel Hayes had been a young artist deeply involved in the civil rights movement. His work had been shaped by the violence and struggles he witnessed firsthand during the 1960s. The most striking revelation, however, came when the journalists uncovered the tragic fate of Hayes's older brother, Isaiah. Isaiah had been a peaceful protester, marching for racial equality when he was tragically beaten to death by a group of white demonstrators during a protest. The brutality of the attack was overlooked by the media at the time, and the police did nothing to investigate. Samuel, devastated by the loss, poured his grief and anger into No Sanctuary, the painting that would become his haunting tribute to both his brother and the countless others who suffered at the hands of systemic racism. As the story of Samuel and Isaiah Hayes became public, it sent shockwaves through the community. The painting was no longer just an abstract symbol of racial injustice. It had a face, a history, and a personal connection that made it all the more powerful. The connection between the artist and his personal loss resonated with many, shifting the narrative from one of divisiveness to one of empathy and truth. The revelation of the painting's backstory had an immediate impact on the public perception of No Sanctuary. For many, it was no longer just a piece of art. It was a memorial, a testament to the pain of the past and the ongoing fight for justice. Social media erupted with new support for the painting, as people from all walks of life expressed their respect for Samuel Hayes' courage in confronting the harsh truths of history. "Now I understand," wrote one commenter on Twitter, "this isn't about guilt. It's about remembrance. This painting is telling a story that needs to be told. We can't forget what happened, and we can't let it happen again." The local community, once divided, began to reconcile. Community leaders who had initially called for the painting's removal now stood in solidarity with the museum, acknowledging the importance of preserving No Sanctuary as a reminder of the injustices that had taken place and continue to plague society. The museum, once threatened with vandalism and protests, now saw an outpouring of support. Visitors who had once called the painting provocative or inflammatory now viewed it through a different lens. Some still wrestled with its uncomfortable truths, but many found themselves reflecting on their own biases and the ways in which history had been swept under the rug. Yet not everyone was swayed by the revelation of the painting's true origins. While some were moved to reconsider their perspectives, others doubled down in their opposition. The more vocal critics of the painting argued that the truth behind the artist only deepened their conviction that the museum had gone too far in showcasing what they still believed was an anti-white narrative. They refused to acknowledge the significance of the painting's message, dismissing it as mere propaganda. One such voice was Tom Harris, the businessman who had initially denounced the painting as divisive. He appeared on television in an impassioned interview, claiming that the museum had exploited tragedy for political gain. For him, No Sanctuary was nothing more than a weapon used to divide the community, and he saw no reason to change his stance, even in the face of the truth. Meanwhile, those who supported the painting found their own responses just as polarized. Some began organizing events in front of the museum, calling for a permanent installation of No Sanctuary as part of a new collection dedicated to racial justice. These gatherings were marked by peaceful demonstrations where people came together to honor the memory of those lost in the struggle for equality. But other supporters, particularly in the activist community, were frustrated that the conversation had only shifted to focus on the painting's origins rather than the ongoing issues of racial inequality. They felt that the public's sudden embrace of the painting was only a small victory, one that didn't go far enough in addressing the systemic problems that still existed. Despite the divided responses, one thing became clear. No Sanctuary had transcended the gallery. It had become more than just a painting. It had become a symbol. For some, it symbolized the pain of the past. For others, it represented the fight for justice. And for those who still rejected its message, it was a reminder that society's reckoning with its history was far from over. As the museum stood behind the painting, Alice Warren knew that the journey was far from complete. The debate surrounding No Sanctuary had forced the city and the world to confront uncomfortable truths, but the change that needed to come wouldn't happen overnight. In a way, the painting had done its job, but the real challenge was ensuring that the conversations it sparked didn't end at the gallery doors. In the final moments of the story, Alice stood once again in front of No Sanctuary. The museum was quieter now, but the echoes of the debates, the protests, and the newfound understanding still lingered in the air. The truth about Samuel Hayes and his brother had sparked something in the community, a willingness to confront the past, but also a realization of how much work remained. The painting remained on the wall, But whether it would forever be a symbol of change or a catalyst for more division was uncertain. Some had begun to question their biases, while others remained steadfast in their opposition. As the lights in the museum dimmed and the doors closed for the night, one question remained unanswered. Would the truth, once revealed, be enough to change hearts and minds on a broader scale? The story of No Sanctuary wasn't over. It was just beginning. The painting had forced the city to reflect on its past and present, but the future of its message was still in the hands of those who would choose to listen, to learn, and to act. The end. For now.